Hello, my name is Andrea White, and I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Toyota Motor Sales. It's just as important as actually, I think, advancing leadership in other underrepresented groups. The idea of innovation is dependent on getting those voices at every level, especially in the appropriate levels where you're doing some decision making, especially around the markets that you represent, right? So being a Latina, I'm interested in the Latin market and what we're doing in that market and whether we're successful there. That same concept really applies regardless of whether you're, a woman or an African American or an Asian. So all the voices need to be heard, and you just have to look at the statistics to know that those voices they're not all there yet. There is improvement going on, and that's very hopeful, but the numbers are still very, very low. So what you need to do in an organization is you need to be able to respond so that the people that are sort of in the wings and waiting for their opportunity to lead, you have to be able to figure out how to tap that energy, how to tap that talent. Because sometimes with some of the groups, it is harder for them to sort of walk the path of success that your standard sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant guy has walked. It's a little bit more difficult. Sometimes it's cultural. Sometimes it just feels very uncomfortable when you don't see yourself in the upper level ranks of leadership. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a holding hands out to each other, right? So that we know what we need to do as Latinos and Latinas to help meet halfway the requirements of marching up the ladder. But I think also if corporations want to retain talent, right, you're going to lose people if they have to work too hard. And if they're good, you're going to lose good people. So if you are reaching out together, that's why the programs actually have to be sort of symbiotic. I think you as a corporation, number one, you're going to maximize your ability to innovate because you're going to get all those voices in the room. And number two, you're going to retain your talent because people will see that they are actually being heard and being valued. If you don't know anything else but what you've been raised in, how do you know what is an effective way to reach to your next level of leadership? And if they happen to be different from you, how would you know how to speak to them, how to connect with them, and how to inspire them, and how to teach them, really? So that's why the training, right, the sort of the consciousness raising training needs to be on both sides. You really need to have your leaders understand why maybe they don't have all those voices at all levels, and is there something they could do to help, again, sort of bridge the gap. Because I think that Latinos and Latinas they're ready to bridge the gap, and they've been working hard at doing it, but they still have, these sort of odd cultural issues like humility. Humility gets in our way all the time. We hate tooting our own horn. It feels like bragging when you even talk about yourself, right? So if you're trying to sort of market your brand inside a company and you can't even feel comfortable talking about yourself or, sort of talking about your successes without feeling like you're breaching this humility requirement of your culture, it makes it really, really hard. And so we need training. But I think also, again, if you want to be a forward-thinking company, if you want to make advances and maybe even grab that competitive advantage, then you need to be, bridging that gap. Right. So one of the things that Glenn doesn't necessarily, or CHL doesn't necessarily have as part of their 5 basic core characteristics is servant leadership. I think what resonates with me very strongly is servant leadership. And servant leadership meaning, if I'm leading you, I don't lead you by telling you what to do. That's not how I lead. I lead, number one, by being a role model, right? By being someone who you can emulate so that you work the way I work, or you learn how best to accomplish things, because I think I do a good job of accomplishing things, right? The servant leadership is actually very, very valuable. And in the Toyota organization, it's that's what they try to train you to do. I had a conversation with the president of Toyota a few years back. He just was inviting various people to kind of share ideas, and I asked him about his leadership style, and he talked all about servant leadership, that it is the role of the leader to enable his people to be the best people they can be. And that resonates with me, because in a Latino culture, you're raised to serve others. You serve each other in the family. You serve your grandparents. You learn to serve in school your teachers, right? There is that sort of respect that you are taught from a very young age, and that becomes sort of your servant perspective. In fact, in Spanish, you say mande. If someone says something and you didn't get what they said, you say mande, which means, you know, how can I serve you? How can I support what you're asking for? And so it's very, in a lot of ways, it's such a great culture, because everybody really is trying to help each other, right? It's all about helping the other person, not self-recognition, but team recognition. You know, I think it probably is the fact that I had 5 brothers. I was the oldest. I was the girl. I had to become sort of a parent at a very young age. I felt very protective about my brothers. I felt, you know, like, you can't beat him up. I'm the only one who beats him up, right? It was sort of the team, the family was the team, and I was sort of a sub-leader of the team. And my pain was their pain was my pain. Their failures were my failures, right? I felt that invested in being the oldest sibling and the girl sibling. And I think that dynamic, and that's not necessarily even a Latino dynamic, right? That is a dynamic of a large family, girl child, and maybe the Latin comes in there because the women always, you know, the girls have more of a traditional position in the family. But I think that I am a good team leader, because I learned team leading when I was, you know, 4, 5, 6. I mean, my brothers started coming pretty quick, and they didn't stop for a while. So, you know, it was like being the head of a team, and it was a family team, right? So you had to love each other in addition to everything else, right? So I invest in my teams. I have to know who they are. I have to know what their needs are. I have to make everybody, you know, make sure everybody is at the best place they can be so they can do their best work. And I get that from my family. I think every time I see the demographics, I think, what can we learn? Because if you look at those success measurements, and I mentioned those in my talk a little bit ago, but that in almost every measure of success, whether it's educational, right, undergraduate, graduate degrees, in the professions, amount of money you work at, or amount of money you make every year, household ownership, Asians outperform everybody, right? There's like no exception. So you look at kind of what their culture is, and I have to say, I'm not that familiar with the internal workings of an Asian family, but I do know about the emphasis on education. And I do know that that the family does everything they can to support the children getting that best education, doing the best in school, getting the best education, applying to the best universities. I know that that's what they do, just from conversations I've had. So I think what we as Latinos can do and help each other with is a little bit more emphasis on education. I think what has happened is because so much of the population is new, you know, immigrants, first generation, second generation. I think they're not quite at the point where they've learned that that's the way you play things in the United States. In the United States, education really makes a difference. That's pretty clear. So I don't think they've made quite that transition. Now that is also different between Latino groups, right? The Hispanic population is different. You've got major factions. You've got the Mexican American, Central American faction. You've got the Puerto Ricans and Cubans, right? Puerto Ricans, big percentage of the Hispanic population in New York. The Cubans in Miami. They're the ones who the Cubans are the intellectuals, right? Those were the educated. They came to the United States. I mean, in great numbers. That's where they came from. That's where they. Those are the ideas that they brought with them, is sort of that more educated idea. So if you look at the statistics, Cuban Americans actually do really well. So I think the biggest challenge is actually with those who are sort of middle to lower class Mexican Americans, Central Americans. I actually even think South Americans are doing okay, if you look at the statistics. It really is dependent on the group that you're looking at and working with. But I will tell you that the Cubans that I know, the women, there are still some restrictions for Cuban women about like leaving town to go to college, in another state, for example. Whereas men, it's a lot more acceptable. You want to go across the country and go to college, absolutely. But for women, maybe not so much. So there's a lot of dynamic there. There's a lot of differences, and so the idea is not only is every group different and unique, every person is different and unique. That's the challenge.